And we're live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our virtual presentation of The Darkest Glare with author Chip Jacobs and our moderator, Ron Franscell. We will be doing an audience Q&A towards the latter half of tonight's event. So to submit your question, just use the Ask a Question button at the very bottom of the page. You can also vote for any questions you find interesting, and they will make their way to the very top of the list. Also, we have some signed copies of The Darkest Glare available. To receive one, just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. It will take you to our website where you can complete your purchase. Just make sure to write signed copy in the comment section when you're completing your purchase so that we know that you specifically want a signed copy to be mailed to you. Also, Vroman's is the oldest independent bookstore in Southern California. We are 126 years old, and therefore we rely on avid readers and generous patrons like yourselves to keep our lights on. So we appreciate any kind of support you can give us at this time. And with that said, let me briefly introduce our speakers for tonight, and then we can jump right in. Chip Jacobs is a best-selling author and journalist. His books include the historical fiction Los Angeles. Excuse me. All right, let me start that over. I got tongue-tied. Chip Jacobs is a best-selling author and journalist. His books include the Los Angeles Times bestseller Arroyo and biography Strange as It Seems. His reporting has been featured on the LA Times, LA Weekly, CNN, the Southern California News Group, and many more. He is the recipient of 7 Los Angeles Press Club Southern California Journalism Awards. And joining him tonight is our moderator, Ron Franscell, former journalist and the author of 17 books, including the Edgar-nominated Morgue, international bestseller The Darkest Night, and the true crime Alice and Gerald. And he is also a frequent guest on crime documentaries at Investigation Discovery, History Channel, Reels, and A&E. So with that said, I'm going to unmute our guests and we can get started. Enjoy the talk, everyone.
Thank you, Rira, and thank you to Vroman's Bookstore for putting on this fireside cyber chat. I'm delighted to be here with my friend Chip Jacobs to celebrate yesterday's release of The Darkest Glare. So I hope you'll all push that button down there to purchase his book. I promise you'll be glad you did. Most of all, I want to thank you readers for being here or there or wherever you are tonight. Only a year ago, this kind of a book event on this kind of a platform would have been extraordinary. But tonight, it almost seems like it's no big deal. One of the true joys that a writer has is mixing face-to-face with real readers at real-world events. You're simply why we tell stories. So telling any story requires at least 2 of us, the writer and the listener. I regret we can't be together tonight, but this is the next best thing. And these are uncommon times to say the least. So let's get started. Welcome, Chip.
Oh, Ron, this is a long time in coming, and I could think of no one else I would rather have be the quarterback of tonight's talk. So thank you very much. And, hello from California to Texas.
Well, or New Mexico, since I've just moved. We go way back, don't we, my friend?
When you were a Texan, yes.
Well, over the years, I know we've talked about how no single part of this writing game is easy. Nope. And in fact, it's sometimes downright nasty. And it's one of those times that we met. So tell everybody in the most restrained language possible what brought us together.
Sure. Thank you, New Mexico, Ron. Now I have it right. So, in about 2011, I was coming off a very successful book about the LA smog crisis, having been a reporter before then. And my agent got me a deal with a trade paperback specializing in true crime back on the East Coast. And little did I know that the people running this publishing house were kind of crooks. And they, as I found out, started negotiating with a film production company about my book without even telling me. And it was with a production house of a very well-known actor. And when I called up the publisher, infuriated about it, she said, you know, you're asking a lot of nosy questions like a reporter, and kind of how dare you? And you should be thankful for the pittance of a royalty of an advance you got. And it began the deterioration of my relationship with them. And after things blew up, I met Ron. And, you know, for me, it was a staggering blow. I had always, as a journalist, felt so lucky that stories came to me. I got the big break. And in a way, I feel like it was the universe humbling, telling me to be less cocky and less and less presumptive of a bed of roses wherever I walked. But I met Ron, we commiserated, and then I I read his book, The Darkest Night, and it showed me what a true crime book can be. Not a procedural, but actual literature that studies the sociology of a culture and brings heart as well as the spectacle of the crime. And,
okay, but we're here to talk about you, not me.
I know, but the thing was, Ron and I had a very similar outlook in terms of writing, about descriptive writing, and we also shared a wry sense of humor. And we became fast friends in this little club, and it honestly made a giant difference in my confidence that somebody like Ron could see, what I was trying to create with this true crime book when I never considered myself a true crime writer.
Well, and then I thought you were going to tell this story about how we drove around LA looking for famous crime scenes for a few glorious days. I think Steve Hodel is out there in the audience, and he and I have done that too for my book, The Crime Buff's Guide to Outlaw Los Angeles. And being in the car with you all that time was glorious, but oh my God, Langer's is where time began. So I appreciate that introduction that you gave me.
But Ron, I was going to say, you were the first person in the passenger seat who said, my driving did not make them sick. Because I tend to be more of an aggressive driver, probably part of a type A personality that I am. And I still remember, you came from the South, where they're very good at barbecue and processed meats and those, kind of juicy, indulgent sandwiches. And the yummy noise that you made when you bit into Langer's, it was like a culinary, I got it. And I'm surprised they did not hear it in Orange. And it was a true delight.
All right. Well, that brings us to LA, which, of course, is where The Darkest Glare takes place. 1970s, late 1970s Los Angeles. I want you to set the scene for all those readers sitting out there waiting for this one thing. Yes. But then I want to talk a little bit about something we've talked about in the past, and that is how time kind of wrinkles, how the past and the present can get all tangled up. So looking back at 79 and bring that into 2021, I know you have some interesting thoughts on that.
I do. In 1979, my first introduction to the angry culture of Los Angeles, and really kind of the zeitgeist of America, was when I briefly swerved into somebody's lane driving home from school as a 17-year-old high school junior. And it was like I had burned the man's house down. He chased me in his VW van with another friend of mine named Dave Ferris. He trapped us on a cul-de-sac, and I thought we were going to get murdered. And years later, when I started writing this book, and today, I see such incredible parallels between a very disenchanted, demoralized, divided America that we saw in '79. You know, there was America had taken many punches to the chin: Vietnam, Watergate, stagflation. We had, hostages taken in the U.S. embassy in Iran, and the mission to rescue them failed. There was the invasion of Afghanistan. There was 3 Mile Island. Very little seemed to be going right in America. And in fact, you know, the whole Miracle on Ice victory was really the national shot in the arm we needed. 1979 Los Angeles was a lot more violent than 2021 Los Angeles. But still, there was sort of anger in the air. And freeways had a lot to do with it. The sense that the system, like today, has let people down, it was prevalent. And all you have to do is watch the speech by the anchor in the movie Network, and it is brilliant. And it was also very portentous of what we are seeing. And there was no guarantee America was always going to be thrive and happy and productive. And I really do feel like folks since then and now, the American dream wasn't all that it was billed to be.
That's certainly comes through in the book. Let's get right into that. I hesitate to tell any author to tell us what the book is about because they go on too long and it tells us the interviewer didn't read the book. But I've read the book and I've read all your books. So let's just jump into it. We've met Jerry Schneiderman before, haven't we?
Yes, we have. I have previously written his story that was published shortly before his untimely passing. And it was much more of a biography, almost like a long piece of journalism, investigative journalism, but featured journalism. And it was rushed out. I never felt I reached the story's highest potential. And I also don't think, as a person, I reflected enough empathy and appreciation for the people that survived the monsters that came out of them. And I was so devastated by Jerry's passing, about what had happened with that publishing company. The book ended up being very self-pitying of me. And that wasn't, that was a dereliction of duty to write the story the way it needed to be, as a true crime story with mystery and surprises. And when I went back to rewrite this from the ground up, I found that I had neglected a lot of interesting, horrifying, and sometimes, amusing elements. For example, after the mastermind of this crime, between the time he pulled it off and the time he was arrested, he was just doing normal contractor type work. And in fact, one of his jobs, if you can believe it, was for the California Association of Realtors, which is a trade group dedicated to the integrity in the industry. And you can't make those types of things up. It reflected the mastermind's confidence he would never get caught. So things like that, as well as my appreciation that I had short-armed the court element of this story, which was really interesting, that fueled me. And I felt like, as I was doing it, this is the book that should have been there all along.
I think that we're going to talk about the characterization part a little bit later here, but I found some of these characters fascinating, and the situations they were comical. And maybe you'll describe some of that, but is there a classically defined hero in this story?
I think the obvious hero, and he's more of an anti-hero, which means a hero but a flawed one, is Jerry Schneiderman, and as well as his family. But they were uninvolved in the saga that got him sucked into it. So I would say Jerry really is. And, some people have asked me, why do I include more about his life after some of the things happened? It's because I really wanted to show the effect of post-crime PTSD, and how one incident can be so scarring, it can actually, modify your personality and be like this poison you have to wick out. And so he is the anti-hero. If you look at the major parties involved in this murder for hire and the execution of a guy that had some issues but never deserved it, Jerry was the least likely to survive. He was the if they were taking odds in Vegas, it would have been 50-1. He made it out of this. And I love that part of it, and sometimes I think human beings deserve the Congressional Medal of Honor just for survival, because survival is a victory unto itself. And I also will say, for Jerry's family, then and now, I just think the highest of them, because they could have packed it in and been dark and bitter and mistrusting of others. They weren't. Another family that faced these monsters are named the Bulansantes. They lived in Monrovia, and at one point they were friends and the beneficiaries of the mastermind's generosity when they first emigrated from Argentina. And a really horrific near massacre was visited upon them, and yet they have a grace and resiliency about them, and a sense of humor. And I don't know if I could have pulled that off. And so this book, in a way, is a tribute to their survival, as well as the idea the best revenge is being happy.
One thing we writers hear a lot about, maybe a lot of the people in our audience tonight, is Hollywood and stories. I think from the writer's perspective, we don't think anybody in Hollywood reads a book. What they do is they read that 50-word pitch, that the log line. What would be the log line? You can sort through this. It doesn't have to be 50 words, but what would be the log line in The Darkest Glare, for The Darkest Glare?
Great question. The log line would be a collision of men from 3 different parts of Southern California that could have been coming from other planets. Folks, I think outside of LA have this perception it's this one kind of spread out community. It's not. It's almost like a series of tribes and confederations that just happen to share zip codes and access the same freeways. You had Jerry, who came from North Hollywood, which, as I write in the book, is a million miles away from the real Hollywood. He came from a bit of a strange upbringing, but a place where there was a lot of love. You had the victim in the case named Richard, who was an extremely talented, debonair, suave personality, and he came from what's called the Platinum Triangle area, which is Brentwood, Beverly Hills, and Bel Air. And he did originate in a more entitled place. Then you have the villain in the story. And although he actually lived in a Pasadena condo when he was running his murder for hire corporation, his buddies, his spirit really resided in Ontario, California, which is a city just across the LA County line to the east. And it was the Badlands. And out there, opportunity plentiful in LA, and optimism and the glamour. Those things might as well have been destroyed in a nuclear blast. It was a stark contrast, and it wasn't lost on the criminals when they used the LA freeway system to come and do their dirty work, and they're driving from a very low income, bleak existence into a place where life works, where there's beautiful streets and there's jobs available and there's nicer cars in the driveway. And I think it fueled their own self-justification that what they did was owed to them.
Western writers in general, and primarily interior West, have one thing in common, and that is the landscape, the climate, the weather, all those awfully intangible types of things. Well, landscape we can touch, but it becomes a character in the storytelling because it's so important to the life of the characters, whether true stories or fiction. What you're describing there is something very, very similar, where the character, the county lines, the closest to the beach, the sunsets, whatever, are all playing a role in this human interaction. Am I missing the point there? Am I misstating it?
No, you're not. And one of the characters who came from Ontario had been groomed by the mastermind as his initial hitman. And I think he saw a way to make money, denied him as he cycled in and out of prison by going from a bleaker environment into richer area of LA, Van Nuys in this time. And he, of all the people, including very well-known lawyers who heard about this murder for hire in advance, he showed backbone. And despite maybe his feeling of economic and class resentment, he tried to disrupt this crime. And one thing I think that's very important in my story, and I do try to bring out, is that there are certain events in life that develop this unstoppable momentum, trying to stop an aircraft carrier in its tracks. And this never, even somebody with good intentions can't reverse that reality. But it's in 1978, California voters passed Proposition 13, which ended up putting a lot more money in their pockets. And now folks could remodel their houses. And Jerry's partner, Richard Kasparov, said, aha, all that disposable income could be our opportunity, and we should expand our business. And even though it's going out of our bailiwick of space designing, interior architecture for commercial properties, and do home remodeling. And that turned out to be a really bad decision and a classic case of kind of a get rich quick idea. Smart as it might have been, the way he took the first man who wanted the job of overseeing that construction, turned out to be a fateful one.
Well, by the way, I'm watching the conversation going on among all of our audience and just having a lot of fun watching that and listening to you at the same time. I am listening to you. What did you say again? No. Okay.
They're commenting on my bad call.
You know that I've long been a fan of your voice. I really wish that I could write that kind of devilishly bizarre, that dark slapstick, jazzy stuff that I loved in your novel Arroyo. And now here in The Darkest Glare, I'm sort of seeing a little of that same offbeat DNA. Here's what I want you to know. And what I want to know myself is, how can I be as cool as you? Do you have any idea?
I'll answer it sort of in a different way. I've had people say, including somebody on Facebook, murder is not funny. And it's not funny. And it was, I think they were reacting to a blurb from a review in Publishers Weekly, whose reviewer, I'm not sure, fully read the book. Nonetheless, I think it would be a dereliction of my duty writing the story if I ignored what was very obvious and probably had the participants giggling in just raw absurdity that this was happening. Almost like you laugh when you want to cry. And I mean, for me, just to blow past that and say, okay, this wasn't darkly funny. What happened next? It really would be depriving the story of its juice. I learned pretty quickly that Jerry did not understand how big the murder for hire environment was circling around him. He didn't know how many other people were targeted, and there were a lot, including the Buonsanti family, folks being pressured by our villain to give up where his departed hitman was running because they wanted to murder that guy. And I did not try to write a funny book, but I try to write a truthful book. And I think sometimes in something so dark, it is okay to laugh, but in no way do I think murder's funny. I have it in my own family ancestors, and nobody's giggling about it.
Well, I think you're correct about that. I know you're correct. Murder isn't funny, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen in a context that makes you maybe laugh out loud, but certainly wonder what universe these people are living in, and where they come up with all this stuff, and makes people think you made it up. That was a hurdle for you, wasn't it?
It was a big hurdle. It was a big hurdle, making people realize it's true. It's in the court documents. It's in all the interviews I've done. It's in not just depositions, but in other places as well. I'll give you an example. So after Jerry's partner is killed in this terrible rainy night shooting, they decide they don't. He and his wife decide they're not going to stay in their house out in what was then called Northridge, because it's filled with glass windows, and that's where his partner had been shot through his own glass window. And so they quickly had hired security guards. They get in their car to go to a friend's house, and the car starts smoking. Smoke is billowing up and steaming out of the front of the car. And the first impulse was, there's a bomb. Somebody has planted a bomb under the car hood. And they have to scramble out, stand away while they're, the security guards, these kind of long hairs with pistols out their hips, pop the hood, carefully check to make sure they're not going to detonate something. And I mean, this is where their life had gone from a very upward mobility, American dream success. I mean, at 27, Jerry was making more than his father made, was the youngest man in his own booming firm. And now he's worried his car is going to look like something out of the Mideast, And so, I mean, that just happened. And, it made their survival that much more relatable.
The story is terrific. I'm glad you did write it. But what compelled you to write it? I mean, I see stories all the time, and I put some of them, back where they came from. Some I put in a possibles file, and a very, very few I say, gee, I'd like to write that book. Why did you want to write The Darkest Glare?
Well, Ron, I have this very deep streak of masochism in myself, where I genre hop. My first book was a biography. The next was an environmental social history. This is true crime. I mean, it is self-sabotage at its literary finest. But I have a restless intellect, and I'm curious. And I don't think, it's fine for me to know algebra 1 and 2. I don't need to go to calculus and trig. And the story, just grabbed me because nobody could believe it was true. There was heart. There were surprises. I mean, Jerry had a former Israeli mercenary who fought in the Middle East wars, accompany him and beg him to let him take out the murderer, because the MFer police were afraid to do it. They weren't afraid to do it. They were following procedures. I mean, there was so much material here. And just to kick it aside as I learned more and was trying to educate Jerry, we actually got into some brinksmanship where he goes, I bet you can't find this. I bet you can't find that. And eventually I found a heck of a lot more. And I felt like the best way to tell history is through specific stories. I try to tell LA history through Smog, and I'm trying to tell 1979 through Jerry, his partner, and the bad guy. And there's somebody says, show don't tell. This was how I showed.
I don't know if either of the Coen brothers is in the audience tonight, but I would recommend your story to them because it has all those elements, has all their elements. I'd love to see this in film. One of the hardest things to do in true crime, I found, true crime literature, as opposed to, the more formulaic supermarket stuff that we see. One of the problems is drawing these three-dimensional characters. They're genuine, they're complex, they're human, of course. They're not cardboard cutouts. So bad guys can have some good qualities. Good guys can have a dark side or a few foibles. And we talked a little bit about Jerry, the anti-hero here. But it's true in The Darkest Glare that you did a pretty good job of drawing these people in all of their sort of violent colors. I think I'd like to know from you how you did that. How did you capture their spirits?
Wearing out, the leather on my shoes or the rubber on my Vans, asking questions, going back, looking at pictures of them, researching old articles. For example, there was this crazy character who was a former lawyer who became this leasing king named Paul Fegan, and he was a very LA counterculture figure. He had Jimi Hendrix, Devo, and David Bowie perform for him. He used to have these parties. I mean, he was quite a narcissistic personality as well as a successful one, but he used to have parties where people were all told to dress in purple. And the highlight of the evening was watching his strange hair getting cut by a famous stylist. And so, I mean, I read up a lot about Paul Fegan. I tried to, see clips of the movie he claims were based on him. And for me not to write about the idea that he, drove this vintage car looking for young girls and would stick sequins on his face, it's not fair to characterize him as what he wasn't, which is just an eccentric. Jerry learned from him. I always try to make sure if there was a character, they influenced Jerry like two objects in space, gravitational pull. And some people don't like that read true crime. They don't like more than your basic 2-line description. And when you spend more than an extra couple sentences, talking about like Paul Fegan, for example, he had this army of secretaries that he trained right down to bringing his press clippings when he clapped, sharpening a pencil to a certain degree. I mean, that is what makes people, is their quirks, their foibles, and their differences. And so, how could I just not write those types of things? And I also try to present Jerry as a more complicated figure. To the end, I still don't think I fully knew Jerry, but I did realize, especially when I went back, there was this unsettled vibration. I now understood when I talked to him and I looked in his eyes, almost like the ghost of these bad guys after him were still in his bloodstream. So I had to make sure I did not fall short in describing people the way they were.
We are both ink-stained wretches, or at least former ink-stained wretches. We both come from a journalism background. how did your journalism, or at least your experiences in journalism, help or hurt you doing this and some of your other books?
Sure. I mean, I just wrote an essay about my journey to write a true crime book. I'll just say the first crime scene I ever covered was in 1993 when I was still a cub reporter. There was a shooting at County General Hospital. The normal crime reporter was out, and my editor said, "We need somebody to go down there and cover this thing." I tried to like duck low behind my monitor because I was working on an investigative story. So sure enough, she picks me on the first day I'm wearing a nicotine patch. I go down to the hospital. I'm late, and I open up a door to the hospital to try to see where the other ink-stained wretch reporters are, and I walk into an active hostage scene. The gunman was holding people hostage, doctors, just right around the corner, and a cop yells at me. I very much grew from that and relied on basic reporting skills to get this story. It starts with interviewing, starts with documents. Don't take people's word. Be skeptical. For things that are sensitive, double and triple source them. Try to, once you get a stack of documents this high, step back and ask yourself what is happening. Like almost like you're a meteorologist predicting a weather system. I think being a reporter teaches you to think logically, clearly, and to know that there's many sides to the story. And I really could not have done that without this understanding where I got records. I mean, I did talk, as a reporter, one of the things you have to do is be persuasive. And my big break came when I met the prosecutor who tried this case. And he knew my reporting. He respected my reporting. And he opened up his garage door. He had brought the files home. He said, "Have at it, kid." And I took home, I practically like blew a tire. I brought home so many documents. But it was because I was a reporter, and I think I had an ability to ask questions and not annoy them too much, and against my own personality, that I got through what I did. I don't think I could have just walked into this as a wannabe, true crime writer. I'm not one.
You mentioned shoe leather. I think the guys, dinosaurs like us, talk about shoe leather journalism.
Yep.
Do you think you could have gotten what you needed to tell this story if your primary means of communication were Twitter and email and even a telephone?
No, actually, that's a great question. I remember when I went down to the County Hall of Records, and to do this, you have to go into the subterranean no man's land where you walk these long concrete halls. It almost looks like a fallout shelter. And when you finally arrive down there, I mean, actually, some of the clerks almost look like they haven't seen sunlight for about 25 years. And, you look up the case number. And when I found the crate that was supposed to contain the entire trial record, I would say 80% of it was gone. And as I learned working on an LA Times story about a major entertainment company and their water contamination, people will go through and poach documents, not just for their own selfish purposes, but also because they don't want the public reading it. And that did make it much harder, and so I had to spend extra legwork, talk to more people, try to find other means to get to those same records because of that. And I have to tell you, part of me likes a challenge. I do like it when people say, no, you have to find it another way. And that's what makes for, an industrious writer, surmounting those things. And the toughest part of this story was talking to people that were still wounded by what happened, still affected. Folks that refused to open their curtains up because of that bullet that had killed Jerry's partner. The victim's widow, who still keeps his name, a very strong, complicated woman who wept even as she laughed and smiled, thinking about the love of her life despite their problems. And I just when somebody cries around me, I just want to go grab tissues, hug them, and say I'm sorry. And that was when I saw the pain this caused. It did make me question: should I do it? How do true crime writers adapt to that? And it was brutal, and I still feel guilty even now writing about this. And I just hope they have faith, they have belief that this earthly world is a speck of existence. I don't like seeing people bow their heads there and wipe a tear. There was this one person named Bree Levine, who's in my book. She was so skittish to meet me after I finally tracked down her number. It took me probably a year and a half just to get her to meet me for lunch at the Hamburger Hamlet in West LA. And she, I think when I walked in, she probably wanted to slide under the table. Like, I'm having second thoughts. I don't want to talk to you. You have to build trust with people that you're not going to screw them over, and that, you appreciate this very ingrained fear.
You make an interesting reference there. I wrote an essay some time ago called Cry Later, and it was really about the necessity to compartmentalize what you're feeling as a crime writer. I'm sure Steve Hodel would tell us what you do as a homicide detective and a crime writer. You made the point that you are affected by these people and when they are deeply affected. Your experience as a journalist probably plays a role here too, but talk about a little of that, what I call the cry later, but the compartmentalization.
Yeah, it's tough. I didn't feel like that when I was interviewing police officers, the prosecutor, people tangential to the main action. But when I talked to the victim's first wife, I talked to his widow, interviewing his first wife, who's just a terrific person. Sometimes I wish would adopt me after my mom passed on. I'd gulp. I have a very expressive face, and I think I had my hands over it or try not to show my emotion, but I'm human. I just can't turn it off. It's something I struggle with. And when I finished this book, when I finished this book, I cried. When I came back from Jerry's funeral, I was so angry, not just at the fact that he was gone. I was so angry at the bad guy for visiting on these people that had done nothing wrong, but, try to live their lives, achieve the American dream, and have faith that Los Angeles was a great town for them. It's choking me up right now. I want to talk about the Buonsanti family that were the victims of this terrible takeover. And I did find inspiration by the fact that they weren't broken people, that they weren't people that whose hands shook with palsy. That they still had the ability to laugh and kid amongst each other and see just the ridiculousness of life. And I think that gave me confidence. I don't know if I would have recovered as quickly as some of these very strong people. And maybe it's their faith, their belief in each other. I don't know, but it's, it takes a lot of steel to be a true crime writer, to do that compartmentalization. And I'm a softie. What can I say? When I finished my novel, I was just a mess. I was just a mess. I did not want to kill off or send my characters off to another land. You just become very attached to them. And I do care about these people I interviewed. I don't want just to be, the typical writer who's a vampire sucking the blood of their pain and their adventures and their experiences. That's why I don't know if I could write another true crime. It's, I just don't have that steel.
Well, you know what? One may leap up and choose you again. You never know. You have a presentation you want to do, and then when you're done with that, we'll go to questions from the audience. We have some, and go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, if I can do it, share screen. Okay, so I'm going to just, for the audience, I'm going to do a very quick PowerPoint that will, as they said in Rocky Horror Picture, will be time warping us back to another time. So I'm going to fly through that and give a quick explanation, and then we'll talk some more and take some questions. Hold on. So in 1979, this, maybe you've heard of it, this weird channel named for the French company that produced it came online. It was called ESPN. So now I'm just taking you on a little walk down memory lane on our time warp. So we had ESPN. We also had something called Voyager, which was the basis of a really strange Star Trek movie. That also came out of my native hometown of Pasadena. And you can compare how this object compares with ones in 2021 that help land on Mars. This was even more culture defining. This was the Sony Walkman, which pretty much everybody got, and now you can find on eBay. Here is some of the disenchantment of America. This was 3 Mile Island. People staring at the reactors, which is not always a smart thing to do when radiation is coming out. As anybody who saw the amazing series Chernobyl, folks watching Chernobyl actually stood on a bridge watching the smoke coming out of the reactor, and not a single one of those people eventually lived. Here is Jimmy Carter. All this incident took place in 1979. Jimmy Carter did a famous fireside chat in his, what I call his Mr. Rogers sweater, advising all of us to turn down our thermometers because we are in an energy crisis. So sorry about that. This was another painful example of an American empire that was struggling. This was the takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Iran. And it was Jimmy Carter's inability to resolve it as fast as Americans wanted that really helped Ronald Reagan win the presidency. Here's the album that all my buddies and I could not stop listening to. Line up for tickets to get Pink Floyd's The Wall. Actually, I'm a big fan of other bands of that era. I think it was a high watermark for great music. And so Pink Floyd was an example I was going to throw up there. The Sex Pistols, Cheap Trick. But everybody was asking, you know, how can you have your pudding if you don't eat your meat? Very symbolic of the American way. This is Dare Hunter, which is a movie nobody can forget and stars the best actors of our time. I still think about this movie all the time. It's probably the greatest movie of the 1970s. Here is, I don't know if this was ever a neighbor of yours, Ron, but we see J.R. Ewing with his smug smile and his 10-gallon hat. Now we've moved back to Los Angeles. These are LA's Twin Towers. These are the Century City Towers in Century City that loom in the sky, kind of like the Death Star, but based on the ground. Jerry, because he was so darn good, won a lot of business in these futuristic spaces and working for Paul Fegan. And, you know, it just seemed to suggest a city that was inventing tomorrow day by day. Here's the Sunset Strip about 1979. Check out the Eddie Money billboard, the Cher video, the Judy Collins sign. Check out the cars. You know, you have your Ford Ecolines, you've got your Volkswagen Bugs, you've got Chryslers and Oldsmobile, and actually you can see the mountains. So I guess smog was in retreat this day. Here is Jerry Snyderman in a photo provided by his family, for which I'm grateful. I know it's fuzzy, but you know, Jerry's partner, who did not make it out of this experience, was a kind of a classically handsome guy. I think Jerry, in his own way, was kind of a cutie pie, and with very distinctive eyes, smile lines, and of course that 70s fro. I mentioned a family that had these monsters coming at them. This was the mastermind of it. You can see him in the early 70s. He is dressed up as Santa Claus, holding the children that he tried to help, tried to welcome to America. And then years later, this creature, this two-legged reptile, I call him, didn't care. Something terrible in him snapped, and he sent goons to their door, and it was miraculous that they survived, and it was also through their wits and guts that they survived. And on the picture of Howard on the right, with his glasses down, there's a bit of a sinister look in his eyes. I just hope you won't hold it against future Santas. Here is one of the people that worked for the bad guy, and he was a mass killer even before his involvement in this. And he was not always destined to be the wicked person that he was. He was born with a very high IQ, photographic memory, and something terrible had happened to him as a child, where his personality changed. And it was because of an accident of little fault of his own. He is part of the reason I wanted to take another swipe at this book, because I think it's an example that nobody is born thinking, you know what, I want to be a killer. I want to shoot a gun through somebody's window. Johnny did not have to have this life. Here is our mastermind in his trademark Hawaiian shirt. He is, Jerry described him as kind of a blonde Charles Bronson. To me, he has a vulturous bearing, widespread apart eyes, a face that unfortunately was the last image many people saw. And he had been, something happened to him early in his life, I don't know what, that made him very resentful, reckless, and a dark spirit. And I only hope his next time in existence, he learns from what he did, because he caused a lot of people pain. And I know there's a lot of folks that never want to see him again. And I also know that when he passed away in prison, it was about the best thing that could have ever happened. Here is Jerry Snyderman in a different fashion. He is now on the run, wearing a disguise from the last two people you saw. And he had to wear the disguise to keep safe, to try to salvage his space design company as it was collapsing. Folks there were terrified, businesses drying up. And, Jerry just went the opposite of his normal appearance, which was to appear in really pricey threads, to look older than he was. He was only 27 years old when he had all the success. And I kind of laughed that he looks a little bit like a very well-dressed pool hustler. Here is the murder report from the LAPD. You can see I have blacked out the real last name of the victim, as I promised I would. And it's a hard document to look at, and it was even harder to obtain. Finally, on a lighter note, amid all this darkness, here's a picture of yours truly in about 1979, 1980, wearing a really bad tux and full of brightness and optimism and troublemaking, never suspecting I was going to write this story. So there you go. That's my little show.
Fascinating. Are all those pictures in the book?
Some of them are, some of them do not.
All right, Chip, we have about 9 questions and we have about 6 minutes. So you do the math. Let me ask the questions, you do the math. Megan Parnell wants to know, how do you select what subject you're going to write about?
I'll just give you a short answer. I really feel like they find me. When I feel in my heart there is an interesting drama with people whose stories deserve to be told, that's when I get engrossed. I also don't want to write about a super popular issue that a zillion people are putting their own spin on. When folks zig, I want to zag. And this story, it got a ridiculous absence of coverage for the tragedy and horror it caused. This terrible, shocking execution of a family man through a plate glass window only warranted a few paragraphs in the back pages of my future employer, the LA Daily News. The LA Times did not cover it. It wasn't on a TV station. There was so much murder in Los Angeles with serial killers, gang violence, etc. It was all but ignored. And it really motivated me, Megan, to want to write it and give it the life it deserved. So that's how I feel they finally.
I love this question. How do you know when you are done researching a topic? What kind of information do you omit, if any? That's from David San Miguel.
I think it's more of instinct, Ron. You probably feel the same. You know, when you go back and reread your first draft, second draft, my novel took me 8 drafts. You think about maybe you go relook at your research, and you just kind of know in your heart, like when we were reporters, you know, this is the best it's going to be. If you pack in 5 more pages, it's going to be extraneous. If you cut 2 off, you are alligator arming the story. And it's a gut feel for me. And people don't want to read a 600-page book. And I'm not going to put out some superficial 100-page supermarket tabloid story. So you have to trust your heart in balance with your head, in equilibrium.
Good answer. Sandra Rentschler wants to know, how many deaths do you attribute to Howard and his henchmen, and how much time did they do in jail?
Well, first, I want to thank Sandra and her family for logging in. This is not an easy story for them to hear. They're part of the Buonsanti family. They lost their mom and dad. You know, there's other struggles going on, and these people just have a shining spirit. I don't fully know. I believe Howard was responsible for between 3 and 4 murders. Johnny confessed it, having killed 4 people before his involvement in this crime. And he never once had been arrested or really questioned for those earlier murders. They were gang related when he was younger. And I feel like the police thought, you know what, the victims really weren't worth investigating, and it really upset me. So together, you know, they killed maybe 8 or 9 people. Moreover, if they had carried out their plans and killed everybody they wanted, it might have been 20 people, because the death of Richard's partner was just the beginning of a murder for profit enterprise where the mastermind recruited lowlifes and junkies and bottom scrapers and people he could exploit, human beings every one, and knew he could scapegoat them. Who was going to arrest a hardworking contractor, you know, with a company with a contractor's license, a car with decals, and a reputation, a good reputation in LA real estate?
Sandra has a follow-up question. She said, are there any potential movie deals on the horizon for this book? And if so, can I pick who plays me?
That's a question for my agent. Over the years, producers have been interested in this story. But I'll tell you, yes, Sandra, I will let you have a say. But I'll tell you this. I'm not going to sell out to the first guy that wants to do a cheap retelling. There's no way. That would be that would be a repudiation of what I believe, and it would just be wrong for those that have survived it and thrived in the years after. I'm going to be very picky.
Luana, she says, I love that you described yourself as a restless, with a restless intellect. What is your work schedule like during the time you write a book?
Excellent question. And I actually went to SC with Luana, so she saw the super immature me. Not that I've changed much. I normally write from about 9 to 2:30 or 3. After that, my attention starts scattering like a really poorly done proton accelerator. And I start getting interested in what's happening on the internet, being the old news junkie. my dog, other stories I'm going to write. So I find that I'm a powerhouse for about 5 or 6 hours, and I'm sure some of my distraction is correlated to my caffeine half-life wearing off.
Interesting question here. Do you read crime fiction, and who are you reading lately? And maybe they don't mean just crime fiction, but take that where you will.
I do read crime fiction. I'm a big fan of The Sympathizer, the Pulitzer-winning work. There's now a sequel. It's not. Of course, I've loved your nonfiction books. I'm a big fan of Denise Hamilton, Michael Connelly, those types. But it's just not my natural interest. Right now, I'm preparing to write my next novel, and so I'm rereading Catcher in the Rye and going back through a lot of my honors class high school books to familiarize myself. My favorite books in the last 2 or 3 years has to be All the Light You Cannot See. A towering work. I will never be in 10 lifetimes as brilliant as that writer. And so when I read a true crime, I want to read great literature. And I think, honestly, that's why I'm attracted to your writing, Ron, to Eric Larson, to Good and Evil in the Garden of Eden, those types of books where it's looking at the culture and not just a spectacle. Good question.
And I think, well, hold on. This one I've got to ask. Zachary Schneiderman asks, what was the driving force to revisit this story?
The belief in my gut. I had not told it as well as it could be. I had not shown enough compassion and understanding to make the characters 3D enough. My probably heartsickness about missing Jerry, and just the knowledge I had put the right story in the wrong peg. And this was a natural true crime story, as opposed to a biography of Jerry as an extension of a pretty successful newspaper feature I wrote about him. And it was just this feeling of unsettledness. And I actually rewrote the first book I ever did about my uncle because I felt the same way. And just that perfectionist in me just drove me. And actually, when I should have been doing more marketing on my novel, Jerry just was occupying my headspace. And I wanted to make him proud that the story reached its highest meter. And I hope I achieved it, though I probably failed to some degree.
And I've not been able to ask all of the questions on here. They're all good. But here's the last one. It comes from our good friend, Steve Hodel. What is around the next corner book-wise?
I am working on I'm working on a novel that will have some tie-in to Arroyo, and it's based on a true story. This is a story that speaks to me about one of the most brilliant kids in our high school class who wanted me to help him compose an apology letter to the victim of an unfortunate accident that he caused. This guy had been bullied in school, and my friend Tom Tookie, who is somebody that should have worked at JPL, he never got over it. And so it's a story about forgiveness, love, companionship. And so it's going to toggle between 1980 and 2000. I'm also working with another writer on the history of the 710 extension, which is the most controversial, longest running freeway battle in probably world history. And as well as that, I am working with a major studio to develop Smogtown into a limited series. That is probably my number one focus. And, I want that story told because America and the world needs to see when we come together, we can do great things. If divided, we fall, though.
Thank you, Chip. Back to you, Rira.
Well, thank you, Ron, for moderating the talk, and thank you, Chip, for writing a great book. Again, for those who would like a signed copy, just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer's screen. It'll take you to our website. We also have Ron's books available at our store, so make sure to check those out. And we do have a replay available for those who tuned in late. Just use the same stream link. Also, where can our viewers find you, Chip and Ron?
Just for me, it's the website chipjacobs.com, as well as on Twitter, chipjacobs1, Instagram. I think it's the same, or I believe, not being the social media person I probably should be. Ron, where can they find you?
Well, I have a website that's being worked on right now, but check it out. Maybe it's up. I don't do that. So when I checked this afternoon, they were still working on it, but it's at ronfranscell.com.
All right.
I was going to say one thing. If people read my book, or Ron's, I won't speak for him, but if people read my book, they like it, they hate it, I would just ask them to please consider Amazon review and Goodreads, whatever they want to rate it, and contact me, and I will send them a free copy of any other of my books. It's
Wow.
I don't want to just be book Johnny. I want them to see what else myself, other writers have done, and the growth and the connection between the different books.
Okay, well, I think that is a great place to wrap up the event. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in and sent in questions and were participating in the chat. It was wonderful to see everyone's comments. Again, the replay will be available after this broadcast ends. And stay safe, everyone, and have a good night. Great.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Good night.